Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session on trade. I will get straight down to my first question to the panel. And Baroness Verma, trade will continue to be one of the engines of growth, and the Bali round saw a lot of hope and optimism, both for developed as well as developing countries. Before we start talking about some of the challenges and issues on the road ahead, can I ask you for a short set of comments on what really has been progress so far?
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. I think the Road to Bali set a framework, but from there we've actually seen some progress, but not enough. But I think the important thing is that when you've got over 150 countries coming together to decide on what they're individually going to do for their nations, on tackling some of the issues that are raised at Bali, then of course we need to look at it in the positive round, that we need to come to some consensus. Between the developing and the developed nations, of course, there is that chasm of growth, which we need to also recognize. But I think that from the UK perspective, one of the things the UK has led on showing is that growth within recognizing the challenges at Bali and going on from Bali, there is a huge growth potential within the renewable sector, within the green sector. And I think part of our fears of hindering development need to be overlooked from that.
Thank you very much. I think that sets us up very nicely. Mr. Thapa, if I could request you from a developing country perspective, how have you seen the road from Bali, and what are some of the challenges that your country has faced as we take this forward?
Well, thank you, Gopal. I think some of the challenges that Nepal being a least developed country and we're trying to be promoted to a developed country, the challenge that we see is that what was committed after Bali basically with the developed country has not been fulfilled. And that remains still a big block for small developing nations like ours. And secondly is also on the legislation and different aspect of the roadmap that we have to follow. Having said this, is that legislation also plays a very vital role because today Nepal is situated in such a complex situation that we've got different trade regime that we follow. Our agreement, like, we've got SAFTA in hand that combines us with South Asian trade facilitation. We've got bilateral trade relationship. And on top of that, WTO guidelines also makes it very complex. And I think one of the challenges for Nepal is to ensure that we get an umbrella act on all these issues so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's interesting you talk about regional trade agreements, and I am going to request Mr. Fragozo to actually step in over here. A very interesting situation. It's 20 years now to the date that NAFTA was signed, and at the time of signing, it was a developing country signing a trade agreement with a developed country. What would some of the challenges be, say, in getting a successful South Asian trade facilitation process going? And in a larger context, how do you see the developing versus developed country divide? Is it going to increase? Is it going to come closer post-Bali?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, to the Economic Time, for the invitation also. I think I had the luck to hear Mr. Acevedo, the head of the World Trade Organization in Jaipur yesterday. And I also had the very luck to hear the Ministry of Trade speech during the event in Jaipur yesterday. And it was very good for me to hear both opinion and to hear what they have to say. And I think there were some things mentioned during the speeches that come to my mind that I would like to recall right now, because they were talking about manufacturing, they were talking about making India, they were talking about developing and developed countries and what the W has to do, what the issues are. And I would like to talk about the experience of Mexico regarding free trade and what the road after Bali would be. I think Mexico, in the case particularly of the Make of India, is a very good example of what can be achieved. I think Mexico, after we signed the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994, our export had more than sixfold from Mexico. We have managed to double the per capita income. So it is very clear that when we work together within the World Trade Organization or within the different countries in order to free the trade, it can be a big boost. As you may heard, the last year Mexico was the 20 years anniversary of the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we have achieved so many goals and so many things that we really would like to share with India and with all the emerging markets. As you may know, the North American Free Trade Agreement was the first free trade agreement signed between an underdeveloped country and a developed country. There were so many speculations at the beginning, but after 20 years, we have seen remarkable achievement from Mexico. Mexico had managed to become one of the largest and the it's actually the largest exporter in Latin America. We export in manufacturing, 80% of our export has become manufacturing. And we export, in Mexico, we export much more than the whole Latin America together in manufacturing. So those are the things that, if you put in mind what India is trying to do right now with the Make of India, I think you are in the right direction. And of course, everything will be replicated in another dimension, because the dimension of the Indian economy, the dimension of the domestic market that you have, can make this story a success story, a remarkable story compared, or even better, to what some other countries have done in the past. So I think calling back to what they call the development Doha round and then the Bali agreement, I think Mr. Acevedo was very clear that they tried to achieve something for this year. And we hope that it will be, because otherwise it makes slower the pace and the growth for the underdeveloped economy or the countries, emerging economies like Mexico and also India. I think it's WTO and all the members, because we know that there are so many members involved and there are so many things that they need to be discussed. But the estimations about how that can improve the global trade, we can recall back, in my opinion, in the Mexican opinion, we look back at the North American Free Trade Agreement, and has achieved tremendous growth from Mexico. So I think it will be also very good for India if the WTO, they agree and they progress during the achievement. I think that will be very good for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Minister Crem, two specific questions for you. And first, picking up from what we just heard on Mexico. While it clearly has been a success story, one of the challenges has been that a lot of the growth has come from multinational companies investing in the country, as distinct from domestic industry actually growing rapidly. What are some of the lessons from there that you can talk us through on, let's say, when India goes forward from the road to Bali? How do we actually also equally promote Indian industry? That would be the first question to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to say that it's a good thing now that India is backing the Bali package. And I think if I could give some suggestion or recommendation, there is no time to lose now. One should really implement what has been backed through Bali. Secondly, I think that there's also need for a speeding up in bilateral multinational trade agreements. I would like to refer to a very important one, which is about to be agreed, which is the TTIP, the European Union Trades Agreement, Free Trade Agreement with the United States and Canada. And negotiations between India and the European Union are taking place also. I would like to make a suggestion, which is that the summit European Union-India takes place as soon as possible. And this will be a very important thing for economic growth for India, but it will also granting the opportunity to India to be more than a regional player, but a player with a very important free trade area, which is the European Union. And in fact, we are a little bit waiting on some initiatives from Indian authorities to take up this process again. And I can only recommend for the Indian economy, for its small and middle-sized enterprises, but also considering it as a backing up of the program that we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday, on lots of fields, that also with the European Union one speeds up. And this is also very important, not only for multinationals, but of course it's a double-way directed trade traffic, not only the Union with India, also India with the Union. And I think that now the time has come to make some concrete progresses on that.
Mr. Bajpai, one of the key issues on actually implementing some of the agreements reached at Bali has been skill. skill levels across the different implementing agencies that need to make sure that what was discussed actually happens on the ground. From your experience, what are some of the big challenges there, and how do we actually start overcoming them?
You see, thank you. Bali sought to make a new World Trade Order. There have been some hiccups also, and post-Bali, the impression is that that particular convention did not achieve fully what was expected of it. Insofar as your reference about skills is concerned, you see, skill is the basis on which the potential of a human being is realized, and he is empowered. So basically, whether it is Bali or no Bali, we have been trying in our country as such to improve the skills in our state also. In the previous panel discussion, you have seen the kind of steps that the governments are taking now to enhance the skills of the people and move them across the lands so that they can have a better quality of life, a better contribution to the world GDP. So my take on this is that skill development, skills upgradation, and specialization of skills has to take place anyway, and the new World Trade Order has to recognize this, and it has to have a level playing field so that every nation, everybody can contribute towards it. Thank you.
Thanks. A question to you, Mr. Syngros. We've talked of some of the challenges of implementing Bali as being financial, as being skill-led. A lot of what Bali talked of would necessarily involve some regulatory and legal change in 152 countries, each of which has a fairly complex legal structure. Do you see some of this as really impeding the road going forward? What can be done to speeden some of this up? Are there some successful examples that other countries can learn from as they embark on the regulatory process?
Thank you for the question. First of all, make it clear, my situation is not a result of the situation in Greece, but it's only a result because I was not careful enough on the stairs. Secondly, what you said, it's really very, very important question, and the legislation, the changes in the legislation worldwide, and mostly in the development countries, has to be done, I will say, in a very graduate skills. We have to change our legislation. We have to liberate our legislation. We have to minimize the restrictions that we have in our legislation in order to make the trade between development and developing countries much more easy. It is clear that everybody tried to protect the industry, the industry in their countries. But in the end of the day, this is only a short strategy. We have to see the world in the next 10, 20 years. I personally believe that a strategy in 2030, 2040 should be much more visible for us in order to overcome the problems and to overcome the restrictions that everybody try to make in order to protect themselves. Greece is a very good example on that, because being member of the European Union and having all the restrictions, the market restrictions that we have in European Union, shows us the difficulties in order to overcome the difficult financial situation that we have in our country. Although we have to promote investments, also the trade, because investments will help also the trade, the international trade. We're always facing problems with the state aid regulations in the EU. This is, for me, this is one kind of the problems that we have to face, not only in European Union, but also worldwide. And I think that as soon and as quickly we'll find a way to discuss about these problems and these changes in the regulation. They will be only positive for the world trade. Thank you.
Thank you. And turning to you, Minister Crem, if I may ask, Belgium is a country that has had a very strong history of export-led growth. What are some of the biggest challenges that you as a country have seen for your industry as they go to newer markets from a legal and regulatory perspective?
Well, talking about the market or the perspective of foreign trade and foreign investments, what do companies need is in fact a clear and distinct decision-taking process in the countries where they are investing. And that is very important. I think that's the reliability to have the investments or not. It might perhaps seem somewise or somehow not always very common to do so, but we also need a legal framework in which we can work, and it also has to be in a financial transparency. So those three things: a clear, distinctive decision-taking process, to what extent investments are needed. Secondly, to what extent a possible investment will lead to a cooperative attitude coming from those governments, and from the governments, different governments here in India. And once the investments have been made, is there a legal and financial, fiscal, secularized framework? If this is granted, I think not only from Belgium, but for other countries, United Kingdom, and also from the European Union, there is a bright future for foreign investments of individual member states, but also from the Union. But
how do you see the UK responding to some of the skill challenges from Bali? And what are some of the lessons that other countries can take away from this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think going forward on to exactly what the Minister of State from Belgium has said, first of all, we need to recognize what it is that we're investing in. Because whilst there was a lot of conversation this morning about big infrastructure projects, soft skilling is as equally important as skills. So I think they go hand in hand. The UK has learned a number of lessons. Part of the lessons what we've learned is that instead of forecasting what we needed in the future, we were looking at what we needed at the now, and that has enabled a huge deficit to occur. Going forward for India, we see the same sort of issues arising, given that the pace of growth in India is going to be at quite a speed. And listening to our colleagues from Uttar Pradesh today, with their growth agenda, one of the things that they will need to be very careful of is that they don't have a program that is faster than the actual ability to be able to fill those human capacity gaps. Given that some of the infrastructure projects that they're going to develop have actually not ever been utilized in India. So given I'm from energy and climate change, the solar sector, which we had a conversation with this morning, will need certain skill sets. What we would be very keen with the UK to do for working closely with India, and we hope to be one of the partners of choice, is to be able to work closely with states to be able to bring the expertise and the learning that UK has had over the last 20, 30 years, particularly around certain sectors, and to be able to exchange that knowledge base with the developing states, particularly around the renewable energy sector, where the UK, of course, globally leads, particularly around certain technologies.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask one last question to the panel and then throw open questions to the audience. As trade flows get eased, I think one of the big concerns that many countries have is that we are going to see the emergence of low-cost manufacturing blocks and higher-cost manufacturing and higher consuming blocks. And that is going to leave many countries kind of stuck in the middle, where they neither have factors that can promote low-cost manufacturing, nor do they have inherently strong resource-led economies that can create a consumer base. So if I could ask you, Mr. Syngros, how do you see this whole world order evolving post-Bali? Do we see a kind of polarization into different country groups? And I am going to ask you after that, Mr. Fragozo, for your thoughts, and Mr. Thapa for your thoughts as well on the same question.
Definitely. We didn't imagine we didn't imagine how difficult it is to bridge this gap. I strongly believe that we have to think much more globally as locally. I understand that everybody tries to promote locally his economy and locally the advantages of the location, blah, blah, and in order to give more opportunities for investments in their location, in their countries. But I think that it's now the time to think a little bit more globally. We have to find ways to share the energy cost. It's a very important factor, because in a few years nobody will speak anymore about the cost, the personal costs. The most important cost in the next years will be the energy costs and the financial costs. And if we will not find a way to think globally in these two issues, I think that the problems that we will face in the next decades will be much bigger than these that we have today. I don't think that I'm very optimist, but I think that we have to think globally. That does not mean, and sorry that I take 1 second more, that this is against the local interest of our countries. In the opposite. I think that thinking globally will give more local opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of different perspective in this. Is like, if you look at the developing world, like from America, Europe, and all those, they're shifting their industrial base to Asia and Africa. Because when you look at 2-3 factors, one is infrastructure, the second is human resources, third is capital intensive. And I think now when you look at the whole perspective of industrialized nations, like, going down, I think what Prime Minister Modi very rightly said is the year of Asia. And to that I would also add Africa, because with Asia, with Nepal itself having a potential of generating 83,000 megawatt of electricity is a huge potential. And secondly, when you look at infrastructure, the development of Silk Road, which is called the economic belt, adds value to it also, because that economic belt is going to take all our product that can be manufactured in Asia, all through Europe as well as in South and Southeast Asia. And third is also the human resources capability that Asia has, because today Asia has been one of the largest export of human resources to different countries, especially in the Middle East. So what I would like to focus here is that if you look at Asia, I think this is where like industrialized nation has to go, and that's where the industry is going to grow. Having said this, like, if you're going to also put categorized industries, also depends a lot, because Nepal cannot be an industrialized nation is because we didn't have the raw material. But of course, we have the potential in terms of agriculture, electricity, service sector, and tourism, which plays a very significant role. And to add to this also, like the Bali road is full of risk as well. It's not going to be easy. And this is where I think we all have to really work, because after Bali's meet, there's going to be the next meeting of the ministerial round of talk is going to happen in Africa. So if we don't start preparing from right now, we'll be going to Africa again with nothing in our hand, and we're going to start from zero. And I think this is the point where we all have responsibility from right now, not wanting to leave it to WTO. We had this conference on landlocked, least developed country in Vienna. You know, a little bit of outcome that came was basically on trade facilitation and on infrastructure. So I think these are something that we should put together and go to Africa to come up with a concrete plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Fragozo, your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much. I think in the case of Mexico, regarding we talked before about infrastructure in the previous forum and so on. So we managed to attract a lot of foreign direct investment. Mexico was one of the main receptors of foreign direct investment, mainly for manufacturing. And then we end up with very old infrastructure. We have all the multinational companies doing manufacturing in Mexico. Lately, very high-tech manufacturing, but we needed to upgrade all the ports and the airports and the freeways and the highways and so on. So you need definitely to bring the foreign direct investment in order to boost that, unless you have the capital, or unless you have another strategy, like, for instance, in China, that they developed this huge infrastructure, and then at the same time they were getting all this foreign direct investment and growing at a very high rate. At the end, we are doing reforms in Mexico in order to tackle some of the disadvantages of manufacturing in Mexico, basically the energy cost. We're doing a reform allowing the private investment for the first time in the oil sector, in the oil and gas sector in Mexico, in order to make more productive the manufacturing in Mexico. But what I want to share with you is that I would really like to recommend, and this is something that we are seeing it in Mexico, is that after all the foreign direct investment that we have got in Mexico, we end up with two realities in Mexico. We end up the first reality about all the foreign multinational companies doing amazing successful stories, very productive companies like Bombardier, Boeing, Daimler Chrysler, and so on. They are moving the manufacturing in Mexico for the whole North America. But on the other hand, we have another reality of the Mexican company that we haven't managed to achieve to be part of this global value addition. So if you are talking about investments, if you're talking about investment in manufacturing, I think it's a very good time at the same time to start to developing some program in order to train or in order to create program for the local and domestic companies to be part of this investment that they are going to tackle. Because at the end, these companies, they will be running at another pace, completely different than the local companies, and it will be very difficult for the government to try to give all the support to these local and domestic companies to join the train of the high-speed multinational company that they are doing amazing success stories. So I think that's something that's also important to recommend, because you were talking also in the previous one about the skills, and that is one of the main things. If you have very high-tech manufacturing that we are doing right now in Mexico, we are designing tablets and so on, but all those skills are developed basically by the companies with some kind of support of the government. So I think it's a very, very important subject, what you talked in the previous forum, that you really need to develop right now, to start to developing before the foreign direct investment is coming, all the skills that these companies will be needing, because those are the skills that then will be joined by domestic companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we go to questions, just a couple of minutes from you, Mr. Bajpai, any key takeaways from India as we embark on our own Make in India journey from everything that we've discussed on the panel today?
Thank you. Evolving a post-Bali roadmap is very challenging, and I think integrating the economies of emerging countries or emerging economies have to be given a sense of equality and equity. Emerging economies on their own are also making changes in legislations and also making use of technology. The most important example that I can cite to you is what the Prime Minister said yesterday, what the Finance Minister told you yesterday, that we have embarked upon the most major economic reformation by way of GST. It will evolve into a mechanism of fast-tracking goods and services across the country, and that would help in a good way to integrate the economies in a seamless manner. We have also been trying to use digital technology in governance, and emerging economies have taken to it in a very big way. That also is going to make the task easier. But as I said, the road ahead is very challenging. It requires a lot of understanding, a lot of sensitivity, and a lot of forethought. Thank you.
And if I may add, a lot of preparation, as you said, Mr. Thapa. I think that's going to be key to success of the next rounds. Before we close the session, I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions from the audience. So anyone who has questions, if you can ask them, and also who specifically the questions are directed at. Yes, please. And if you could also introduce yourself.
Yes. My name is Sanjay Prasad. I am a part of the delegation from UP. I look after the power sector there. I think the best news to come out of Bali was that the countries have finally decided to agree on something. So, keeping that in mind, it took 12 years to come to some kind of an agreement. I don't know if that will see the light of the day or not. So, do you think WTO has become irrelevant now? And do you think the regional trade agreements are the order of the day, and India should be looking at more and more agreements like SAARC or BRICS or something like that, and just forget about WTO?
Anyone who would like to take that question?
Thank you. I think this is exactly what I mentioned to you when I first started my statement, because in SAARC nation, we are guided by different, trade agreement. We've got bilateral trade agreement. We've got, SAFTA. We're talking about WTO. But when I say that, it's not like we should forget one, treaty after the other, but there's still combination of treaties that can be put together. And I know that Nepal, with the potential of, I may say, hydropower, electricity, and India has just recently signed 2 power trade agreement and power development agreement, which plays a very crucial role in India's development. So I think these are areas that can be done bilaterally also, but can be, at the end, can be on the total cover-up with WTO. So I don't think WTO would anyway stop, going into this kind of agreement, and which has not also. That's the reason, like 2 months back, these agreements were signed in Nepal. Thank you.
And Baroness Verma, any perspective from you on this?
I mean, I think I follow through for what you've just said, but I think for me the wider issue is its impact on individuals in individual states, whether they're developing or developed. And part of my concerns always is that we expect huge results, but any results going forward are helpful because the impact potentially being positive or negative is on those people who have the least say. And I have a great mission to ensure, and looking at this audience, it reminds me to do it even more, is that we do need to make sure that women and the impact it has on women, the growth agenda, the development agenda, the skills agenda, what the impact that has on women is really, really important and reflective of the decisions that are taken. And given that, power is in my view, one of the biggest needs for all countries to be able to have sustainable, stable power at a reasonable cost, we need to make sure that all those people who will be impacted on our decisions actually are taken into account. And, I have been a long-term advocate of the fact that we still very much, minus from the debate, the greatest impact it will have is on the poorest and those that have the least say in policy decision-making or legislative frameworks, and those happen to be women. So I think if I can have my plea to everyone is that, meetings such as Bali and those going forward, particularly given that the next one will be in Africa, it is really, really crucial that we make sure that the decisions taken really do take account of a much broader impact of policy making rather than just focusing very much on big infrastructure projects.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. Yes, please. If you could introduce yourself, and if it's the question goes to any specific individual. Sorry, we can't hear you. Can somebody give him a mic, please?
My name is Kamal Mittal, and the question is addressed to the gentleman from Mexico. Our Prime Minister has repeatedly said, think out of the box and even think of solving simple problems. The question is, take you to land of imagination. You see an advertisement in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, a full-page ad, which says, India makes an application to join NAFTA. Come, make in India. Can we say anything more? Question is, for you, what would be the challenges, key challenges and threats or risks for India to take such a step? As I understand, NAFTA does not say that any country cannot join NAFTA. Anybody can actually make an application and join NAFTA. That's my understanding of the situation. So if India does make an application to join NAFTA, question is, what are the threats and what are the challenges? Key ones.
If I could restate the question, if India does indeed ever apply to join NAFTA, what would be the big challenges and risks?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just making it sure because I have a hearing problem. First of all, let's put this in a bigger frame, for instance, and I think that's also particular to what I would like to share with India. I think in the experience of Mexico in the foreign trade is that you need to lose the fear and you need to open. Mexico is right now one of the most open countries in the world, and there are so many aspects that I think India is still not ready maybe to open, and that was one of the conditions. For instance, you imagine how was the sentiment of Mexico when we announced we were going to, especially from the business side, how the fear and how unexpected was that we were announcing a free trade agreement with North America. All the business community was complaining, saying all the Mexican companies were going to disappear. So you need to be ready, and you need to make the community ready to say we are going to have a free trade agreement with the biggest and most powerful country in the world. Because you can imagine when you sit down at the table to negotiate with America, what they will ask and what you have to deliver, and what will be the power for you to negotiate in that table. So imagine how us Mexico at the 94 when we wanted to negotiate an agreement, and if you ask me what we achieved, it is remarkable after 20 years. And there are some other countries, yes, they're interested. And but I think the core of the North American Free Trade Agreement in the case of Mexico is basically the geographic location. Mexico has become the manufacturing hub, we call it. Mexico is right now the manufacturing hub for the Americas, because we are so close to the Americans that we compete in the 90s. When China joined the WTO, we lost a lot of the manufacturing to China, but after 10, 15 years, this manufacturing is coming back from China to Mexico. China is getting more expensive, and Mexico is right there. And also it's different now, the strategy that all the OEMs and all the companies, they want the just-in-time. So I think it could have big advantages. It depends on what India wants to achieve. And but it is very difficult because, first of all, what the US and Canada, they will be asking. But in the case of Mexico, it was a very big achievement. We have a lot of challenges that we have overcome, but we have also have a lot of benefits. And I think it's a matter of analyzing if it's something that India wants, and it's something that India is ready to give up, because there are some things that, there are some industries in Mexico that they were really affected. And but on the other hand, we have right now the reality that I was talking before, that we are one of the largest exporting countries in the world. We are the number 4 exporter vehicle country in the world. We are the 6th vehicle producer in the world. That's something that's totally a different reality that was 20 years ago. So that's something that you have to analyze, and that is up to India what they want to achieve.
Thank you very much. And before we close, I'd just again like to thank our panel. Very strong cross-geographic, cross-economic perspectives on the road beyond Bali. It is going to be challenging. I think everything that we've heard our different speakers talk about today talks of some of the challenge, but there is also hope. And if we can work towards solving some of the issues emanating out of Bali, we should see the next round in Africa as really taking trade towards being an economic growth engine for most of the 150 odd countries that are participating in these rounds. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure being with all of you today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon.